when a friendly stranger turned out to be a predator. The house looked normal from the street. It had siding, a small porch, and a flag that sometimes moved in the wind. Neighbors waved when the owner drove by. He smiled and waved back. He was a friendly man who threw cookouts, fixed fences, and helped people find odd jobs. But this night, police officers stood inside that same house with their flashlights raised and their faces tight. A sour, heavy smell floated up from the floor. An officer knelt by a square wood near the laundry room. An old hatch with nails that had been hammered in more than once. He pried at the edge. The wood creaked. Air came up like a breath from a place that should never breathe. The light dropped into the space below and caught on dirt, plastic, and something that made the room stop moving. The officer didn't speak. He didn't have to. Everyone understood that the friendly man was not friendly at all. Before anyone could say the words out loud, the man who lived there smiled his same old smile and tried to talk his way past the moment, like it was all a mix-up, like the floor was just a floor. But the low space under the house had a truth of its own, and it was rising inch by inch into the light. The officers looked at each other. The neighborly mask was slipping. How did a nice, helpful stranger become a predator hidden in plain sight? Years earlier, in the suburbs outside Chicago, people knew a man named John. He wore work boots and a neat shirt with his company name stitched on it. He ran a small contracting business. If your porch step was loose or your driveway needed patching, he might stop by with a friendly, "Hey there, need a hand?" He hosted birthday parties and neighborhood cookouts. He even put on face paint in bright colors to perform as a clown at community events, making kids laugh with balloon animals and silly tricks. He looked safe. He sounded safe. He shook hands like a person you could trust. Some teenagers thought he was a good guy to know because he offered jobs for cash, cleaning, hauling, digging, simple work anyone could do after school. He would say, "I can pay you. I'll even drive you home." Parents liked the idea of their kids earning a few dollars. Nothing seemed wrong at first. He told jokes. He talked about hard work and saving money. He smelled like fresh-cut lumber and aftershave. He seemed like the kind of grown-up who had things under control. But there were small things, little warnings, that didn't feel right if you looked closely. He was always the one who chose who worked and when. He liked boys who were alone, boys who needed help, boys who felt invisible. If a kid's bike was broken, he'd offer to fix it in his garage. If someone needed a ride, he'd offer his car. He always made sure the plan ended at his house. That was his rule, not theirs. When teens went missing, the city felt like a tug on a loose thread. At first it seemed like normal runaways. Kids leaving home after a fight or skipping out for a few wild days. Police said, "He's probably with friends," or "Give a little time." Some boys had argued with their parents. Some had dropped out of school. It was easy to think they had just moved on. The 1970s were messy and loud. Lots of young people drifted. But the list of missing names grew longer than anyone expected, and the homes they left behind grew quieter than anyone could stand. One mother made a list on the fridge, a list that should have been homework and chores, but it turned into dates and phone numbers and the words "last seen." She called friends, teachers, anyone who might have noticed a clue. A father drove the same streets night after night, looking under bridge shadows and into diner windows for a familiar face. A sister kept her bedroom light on, just in case her brother came home late and needed to see the porch. The house never felt right again. The friendly man kept smiling. He shook the hands of worried parents. He said he hadn't seen their boys. He leaned in and sounded kind. "I'm sorry," he'd say. "Let me know if I can help." A young clerk at a local store remembered something. A customer had come in to pick up a prescription for someone else, and the name on the slip belonged to a boy who later vanished. The clerk remembered the face that picked it up, the face of the friendly neighbor. A ring with a set of initials popped up in another place it didn't belong. Little pieces began to float to the surface, like notes in a bottle washing ashore after a long time at sea. Detectives started putting pins in a map. Red dots where boys had disappeared, blue lines for streets that were last seen, yellow tabs for names people couldn't stop saying. Some lines crossed near the same neighborhood, the same house, the same man who waved to everyone. The officers paid him a visit. He was polite, maybe even a little proud. He offered coffee. He talked about work. He answered questions with more questions, like he was the one doing the interview. He told them his schedule down to the minute, like he had practiced it in his head. They noticed things, smells that didn't match the story, stains that didn't match the paint. Nothing big enough to shout proof, but big enough to whisper, "Look again." They left with a plan to come back. Meanwhile, the city tried to breathe through the worry. Some parents made new rules. No walking alone, no rides from anyone, even someone you know. Kids started traveling in pairs. Dogs stayed on porches longer. Porch lights stayed on later. The same friendly man kept waving, kept driving, kept finding reasons to be where the boys were. Predators don't always look like monsters. Sometimes they look like Mr. Helpful. More boys were reported missing. It felt wrong to chalk them all up to runaways. One detective wrote in his notes, "Pattern." Another wrote, "Same circle of places." The map on the wall grew crowded with pins and lines until the whole thing looked like a web. In the center of that web, quiet and neat, was a single address. Police got a search warrant. They returned to the house. They searched the car, the garage, the basement. The man complained about the mess. He wore a little frown like he was the one being treated unfairly. The officers found small things, IDs that didn't match, a class ring that wasn't his, a smell that felt like a memory you didn't want to keep. One officer touched the wall and felt cold that didn't come from the weather. Another wrote down a note about the crawl space hatch. They left with questions that were heavier than what they had brought. The parents didn't sleep. They waited for the phone to ring the way you wait for thunder after lightning, knowing it might break you. Every knock on the door made the room jump. Every unknown number on the caller ID felt like a cliff. People prayed, even those who didn't usually pray. The simple wish was the same for everyone. Please let him walk through the door. Please let this be a mistake. Detectives pushed for another warrant. They listed every odd detail, the ring, the receipt, the stories that didn't match. A judge read and reread the pages, weighed the need, thought of the missing boys, and signed. The officers moved fast. Time, in cases like this, becomes a living thing that sits on your shoulder and whispers, "Hurry." They reached the house when the day was low and gray. The man tried to talk them out of it, tried to play host, tried to reach the same old charm that used to work on everyone. But the officers weren't there for coffee. They were there for the truth, wherever it lived. They went straight to the hatch. The air around it felt wrong, wet, sweet, heavy. One officer pulled on gloves. Another kept the paperwork close. A third stood by the door, watching the man who owned the house, who still smiled but not with his eyes. The first nail came loose. The wood groaned. The room seemed to shrink. Underneath, they found what they were afraid they would find. It wasn't loud. It wasn't even a surprise by then. It was worse. A quiet answer to a question no one wanted answered. The crawl space had been hiding a secret for years, and now it had nowhere left to hide. The friendly stranger was not a friend. He had been hunting where he was trusted. Word spread like a storm. Police cars lined the street. Neighbors stood behind tape with their hands over their mouths. Reporters whispered, for once unsure how to speak this out loud. The city that thought it knew the man in the neat shirt learned that some masks are worn so well, even the mirror believes them. Families gathered at the edge of the scene. Each one hoped, in a hurting, complicated way, that their child wasn't there, and also, if he was, that he could finally come home. One mother held a photo to her chest like it could keep her standing. One father stared at the house until his eyes stung. A sister turned away and counted the cracks in the sidewalk because counting was easier than crying. Detectives worked slowly, carefully, like people untying a knot that could cut their hands. More teams arrived. Specialists opened notebooks. Vans pulled up with quiet doors and long shadows. The friendly man tried to talk again. Soft words, fast words, the language of someone used to getting away with it. But the officers had stopped listening. The hatch had already told them everything. And then came the part of the story that would be told in books and films and news specials for years. The long, patient work of bringing the truth up from the ground. No one spoke about numbers that night. No one tried to add it up. They just kept going. Because the only way out of horror like this is through it, step by careful step. People who once said he's fine, he's helpful, now said, how do we not see? That is one of the cruelest parts of this kind of evil. It uses our good manners and our trust as doors. It smiles. It offers a ride. It says, I can help. It picks victims who deserve safety and gives them the worst instead. The officers watched the owner closely. He paced and scratched and smiled and stopped smiling. He asked for things he didn't need. He tried to take control back, to push the story in a different direction. But the room no longer belonged to him. The truth does that. It changes who holds the keys. One detective walked outside to breathe. The night air was cool and clean, so different from the smell inside. He listened to the sound of distant traffic and the quieter sound of people trying not to cry. He thought of the map on the station wall, all the red pins and blue lines. He thought of the young faces in the photos. He promised, in the quiet of his own mind, to learn each name. Back inside, someone called out. They had found another sign below, another piece of a story that could not be denied. Another officer looked at a friendly man and saw, at last, no friendliness at all, only the tired face of someone whose lies had run out of room. This is what it looks like when a mask falls. The same person, the same hair and eyes, but the light around them changes. People see what they should have seen long ago. And the question that follows, how many, hangs in the air like a bell that won't stop ringing. The city did not sleep that night. Phones rang. News anchors spoke in careful voices. Parents locked doors and checked windows. Teenagers sat on the floor of their bedrooms and stared at the posters on their walls and thought about how the world can surprise you in the worst ways. Some prayed. Some couldn't. Some just waited. The next morning, a small line of people formed near the police station. Families carrying photos. Families with lists. Families who have been told too many times to be patient. They wanted answers. They wanted names. They wanted to know if the long, dark waiting was over. The officers kept working. They were tired, but they moved like people who know that tired doesn't matter yet. The friendly man was taken from his house. He did not wave at the neighbors. He did not smile. The street felt different, empty in a way it hadn't been the day before. A flag barely moved in the morning air. A porch light clicked off. When a friendly stranger turns out to be a predator, the whole idea of stranger changes. He isn't the shadow in the alley. He's the hand you shook at the block party. He's the person who showed up to fix your fence. He's the joke teller, the balloon twister, the one who seemed safe enough to borrow a ladder from. That's why the shock cut so deep. It isn't just the crime. It's the trick. It's the way kindness was used like a costume. The detective who had lifted the first nail from the hatch stepped back into the laundry room. He looked at the open square on the floor. He thought of his own kids at home, their backpacks by the back door, the cereal bowls they'd left in the sink. He closed his eyes for a second, then opened them and put on new gloves. They were going to lift the rest of the boards now. And as the flashlight beams tipped forward and the hatch yawned wider, everyone in the room understood that the worst part of the story was about to be told, because the dark under that house still held secrets, and they were about to rise into the light. The silence after the officers lifted the final wooden board was almost unbearable. They expected dust, maybe old pipes, but instead, the beam of a flashlight revealed something darker, something unnatural. There, in the crawl space beneath the neat suburban home, was the unmistakable shape of human remains. The air was heavy, the ground damp, and the officers exchanged looks that said what no one dared to voice. This wasn't just one body. This was the beginning of something far more horrifying. Word spread quickly among the police at the scene. They secured the house, called in more units, and prepared for a crime scene that would take days to process. Outside, the neighborhood remained eerily calm. Neighbors unaware that the helpful man next door, the one who had painted houses and dressed as a clown for children's parties, had been hiding a monstrous secret beneath their feet. That night, as investigators began the long and grim task of digging, they would discover not one, not two, but dozens of shallow graves. Each shovel of dirt revealed bones, clothing scraps, and silence where lives once were. The number kept growing, and so did the horror. While police tried to process what they were finding, they also had to understand how John Wayne Gacy had lived such a double life. By day, he had been a contractor, a neighbor, a clown at local events, someone people waved on the street. He had attended church, hosted barbecues, and even taken photos with politicians. No one could have guessed that after the sun went down, he became something else entirely. It was a deception so perfect that many refused to believe it even as the evidence piled up. The discovery sent shockwaves far beyond the small neighborhood. Reporters crowded the streets, television vans set up outside the police lines, and America sat in disbelief as each day revealed a higher body count. Parents locked their doors tighter. Children were warned about talking to strangers, and a chilling question haunted everyone. How many more predators like Gacy were living behind ordinary smiles? As the crawl space gave up its secrets, the truth about Gacy's years of hidden crimes came into focus. Police matched missing persons reports to the remains, slowly building a list of victims who had once been sons, brothers, and friends. But even as they identified some, others remained unknown. Faces without names, lives stolen before anyone knew to look for them. And just when the town thought the nightmare couldn't grow any darker, investigators uncovered something that showed just how calculated Gacy truly was.